Welcome to an SFB Addict video. SFB Addict here. So we're going to do a video on Plasma Torpedo enveloper tactics. Now, a lot of the tactics that are valid for just regular plasmas are, of course, valid for envelopers. But envelopers have a few extra couple of considerations. They're basically 3 or 4 ways really that you deploy envelopers. Well, the first obvious one is that envelopers damage all the shields, not just the facing shields. So it is basically a way that you can strip your opponent of shielding. If you were to strike an opponent with 2 regular S torpedoes, 30 points each, that would typically knock down the shield and do 30 internals. Not a death blow to a ship, or at least not a cruiser-sized ship. But if you were to do the same 2 torpedoes and envelop them both, and both hit, you would take away 20 points off of every one of the shields. And considering a cruiser's rear shields are usually 24, you've essentially gotten rid of all the shields on the ship to the rear, and you've lowered the number 1, 2, and 6 shield probably to about 6 to 10 points, which is easy enough to overcome with a few phaser shots. So with 2 envelopers, from that point on to the end of the game, you can punch through paper-thin shields and basically perform the Mizia tactics to strip off the offensive weapons. Now, of course, you're not going to destroy the ship that way, but you will be stripping off the weapons so they won't be hurting you in that way. So that's one consideration for envelopers. Another one is that if you get into a short-range knife fight with a ship, it's a way of damaging the opponent through a downed shield that isn't facing you. So if in the first couple of battle passes, you, for instance, maybe knock down the number 2 shield, and now that number 2 shield is facing away from you, well, the enveloper can still get to that down shield. And of course, there's always the consideration of wild weasels. Now, while a plasma player never wants their plasmas to be weaseled, it does happen. So when looking at the collateral damage chart, a standard 30-point torpedo would do 6 points of collateral, whereas an enveloper will do 8. Not that big of a deal, but it is a consideration. And probably the last valid tactic is to make long-range damage more worthwhile. So if you were doing a plasma ballet and your opponent is cooperating and allowing you to do a plasma ballet, you can launch the plasma, have it go, say, 20 hexes, and it's still going to be doing 30 points of damage, which is 5 points of damage per shield. Which is pretty good considering that you're doing that damage at range 20. 4 more hexes away, at 24, the plasma, of course, degrades to 5 points or 10 points as an enveloper, and it's still going to do 10 points of damage, but distributed amongst the shields. Still a worthwhile amount of damage, as long as you're able to spend the next turn, or turn and a half or so, to open up the range and rearm. Now, perhaps the last thing to consider is the psychological impact an enveloper may have. Now, of course, this isn't going to phase an experienced player, but seeing a 60-point, or if you have an R torpedo, a 100-point plasma torpedo on the board as an enveloper has a tendency to rattle an opponent, or at least a novice opponent. But in a tournament situation, envelopers can actually be something of a hindrance to you if you are going to try and rely on a psychological effect in tournament. Most tournament players, when they see an enveloper on the board, they're probably just going to plow right through it, because they know that in a fight with the plasma player, they are going to take damage, and they would often rather take the damage distributed in a less damaging manner in all of their shields than have a solid strike on one particular shield, especially if they think that they can get close to you and do more damage to you than you are going to do to them. So using an enveloper to try and keep an opponent away while you are rearming torpedoes isn't going to be the brightest thing to do in tournament or in non-tournament. At least not if you don't have a place that you can run away to or distance that you can use to open the range. But perhaps the most often used type of enveloper is just a casual enveloper, where you are in a situation where you may have a few points left over and no real need for those points for any particular thing, but you're on third turn of arming and you can make your plasma an enveloper. So that's pretty much all I have to say on envelopers. Of course, everybody's use of enveloping plasma torpedoes is going to differ a little bit. Some will want to only ever use one enveloper and launch it with other torpedoes in a wave. Some will want to launch two envelopers to try and strip shields or try and force the opponent to run away. And of course, there are going to be others who don't want to use envelopers at all and simply concentrate on getting point blank, anchoring to the opponent, and launching 4 standard torpedoes to try and destroy the opponent in one blow. But whatever way you decide to use your envelopers, just make sure you land the punch. Anyway, have fun playing Starfleet battles.